All right, welcome everybody to the presentation today that is being hosted by IHET. My name is Annabelle Heddle, and I am the Assistant Director for the Illinois Higher Education Center. Many of you have probably seen emails from me or, been working with us before, and we're thrilled to have you here today with us. So just some housekeeping things. This session will be recorded as it will be posted on our website for people to view at their leisure. I do ask that you keep yourselves muted until the end, and if you do have questions, you are more than welcome to put those in the chat, and I will moderate those as we go on. For those of you who are attending for CEUs, I am currently pending CEUs for counselors and social workers, so I'm unable to give those right now as we are renewing our licensure right now. I can still give attendance certificates for those, but I do have CHED credits available at any time. If you guys have any questions with that, you can also email me as well. And at the end of the presentation, probably within 2 hours or so after, you should receive an email. If you attended the full presentation, you'll get an email for the survey that you attended. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Logan Davis, who's here with us. So Logan is working with the Higher Education Center over at Ohio State University with a background in prevention and working with fraternity and sorority life. He is here to bring a new and updated perspective on how to look at how we partner with these groups. Logan, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Annabelle, and so excited to be with you today to talk about partnering with fraternity sorority life and how we reframe the relationship. And so super excited to be with you today. As Annabelle said, my name is Logan Davis. So I work at the Higher Ed Center. We'll talk a little bit more about what we do in just a moment. Just wanted to give a brief background about myself. I work at the Higher Ed Center. I've been at the center since 2019. My role is the Outreach and Engagement Manager, where I do and oversee all things membership in relation to the center, and as well as do a lot of our conversations around fraternity and sorority life. Prior to the center, I worked at Delta Gamma Executive Offices here in Columbus, Ohio, doing prevention education for them. So it was the first time working at a national headquarters. So learned a lot, because prior to that, I was at the University of Arkansas, Fort Smith, doing a one-stop shop Greek life office. I was the Greek life coordinator there, and that's where I really gained my interest in prevention, doing all things for the community. So doing all things prevention education in regards to alcohol, doing things in regards to hazing, but we also were a very small campus, and so a very small student affairs department. So that was when the Dear Colleague letter came out around sexual violence, and so that was where I was able to step into many roles because we were at a small institution, and so really get my feet wet in terms of prevention. But really, enjoyed the background of doing alcohol education, and so that's when the opportunity came at the center in 2019. Was when I moved there. So a little bit of background about me prior to work. So I grew up in rural Western Kentucky, around Paducah or Mayfield. I went to former OVC rival to Eastern Illinois, but I went to Murray State University for undergrad. For those of you that are basketball fans, that's where most people know Murray State University these days, with John Morant putting us on the map a little bit. And if you're a basketball history buff, you may know Popeye Jones as well. So some of the big basketball names for Murray State University. But I had a phenomenal experience there in undergrad, and decided to go into student affairs. And so I went to Louisiana State University for graduate school. For those of you familiar with culture and a little bit of geography, Baton Rouge, Louisiana is very different from Murray, Kentucky. So I had a phenomenal experience, a great learning and growth opportunity there in graduate school before going into work in Arkansas. And the reason I always bring up my background in rural Western Kentucky is because I grew up in a very rural and conservative environment, a conservative home. And so that just shapes the way that I view the world today. Doesn't mean I view it the same exact way as I used to, or the way that I was raised, but it definitely views the way it impacts the way that I view prevention, because I know everyone looks at society a little bit differently, and the environment in which they were raised impacts a lot of times the choices that they're making or the choices that they're not making. And so I always like to mention that, because it has a huge impact on the way that I view the world and the way that I view prevention. Before we do get started, I do want to give a little bit of a shout out to my good friend who helped develop a lot of this presentation, or the idea for it, last year we were developing a concept for a meeting of the minds in Kansas City, Missouri. I actually just got to go this past weekend in Kansas City, so it was a phenomenal experience done by Partners in Prevention out there. They host a regional conference every year. So Brittany Barnes-Deeks, who works with Rise Partnerships, we were able to work together in 2019 or 2022, excuse me, to put that together. Did I hear, does somebody need to say something? Sorry, I just want to make sure we're all good. Okay, sorry.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So just a little bit about the center. So we partner with college campuses across the country, try to help advocate for students in recovery and provide tools and resources for colleges and universities to educate and prevent alcohol and other drug misuse on campus. So that's a little bit about what the center and what we do. So I would love to just know a little bit. Let me pull the chat up briefly. And so if you can just let me know real quick who you are, what you do, and what kind of role you have, so we can just kind of see who all is with us today. So I would love to see that. I know I should have done this while I was doing my intro, so we could do two things at one time. So I apologize about that. So if you could just in the chat, let me know who you are, what you do, where you do it at, and what kind of role you serve. If you kind of fit any of these, or if you're in a different type of role.
Looks like we've got someone from Augustana College who's the Director of Student Wellbeing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. Thanks for being here. So if you don't mind doing that, and while we're doing that, we'll come back if more people are able to share. So but we will just do a quick orientation moving forward about what we mean and do that foundation of what we mean by FSL. So you're going to hear me say the acronym FSL a lot. So we're just talking specifically about fraternity and sorority life. And so we're seeing a national shift using the language fraternity and sorority life and not Greek life, and just to be more proper, and a little bit, accurate of what we're talking about. So we're talking specifically about fraternities and sororities. When we hear about FSL, we're talking about fraternities and sororities. We're going to try to cast a wide net when we're talking about that. But what we're talking about individually, we're talking about our individual members that we have there in the chapters. We're talking about the chapters that the members are a part of. We're talking about campus advisors that work with the organizations in that specifically. And then we're talking about the national organizations that those members are a part of, or that those chapters are a part of, that the members are a part of as well. And then so we're also then talking about the volunteers that the organizations work with. And then so national, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, and learning kind of around the broad scope of things is just kind of getting to know the large landscape of what makes these organizations unique. And then so, but we're also then talk about umbrella groups of what we're talking about. And so many times when we're talking about risk today, when we talk about FSL, we're probably going to be talking about our historically white fraternities and sororities. And so you may hear the acronym NIC, or the National Interfraternity Conference groups. So that's going to be about 70 or so groups. And there's going to be some NIC-like groups. They're no longer a member of that organization, but they are historically white-based fraternity. Then you may hear us talk about NPC. And so that's going to be our historically white sororities. And so that is a little more of a governing body. It's the National Panhellenic Conference. And then so they have a little more control on rules and regulations and policies they have for their members. And then you also may hear us talk about kind of culturally based groups. And so that may be the Multicultural Greek Council. There's also NAPA and NALFO, so that's Latino and then Asian-based groups. And then we have our Divine Nine, or historically African-American groups, historically Black groups, our NPHC, the National Panhellenic Council. So that's what we're kind of talking about. It really is a very large picture when we don't talk about FSL. So it's not just one type of group. There's groups all across the board, and we'll continue to dive into that. Annabelle, before we keep going, anyone else introduce themselves in the chat?
Yes, we got some in the question answers. Let's see. I've got Megan Johnson, who works at St. John's University in the Wellness Ed and Prevention. Got Madeline Agnoranoff, got Education Program Coordinator with the Swedish Cancer Institute. And then we've got Leanne Ritchie, who currently, so she said, I live in Bentonville, Arkansas. Let's see, and currently stay-at-home parent, but formerly worked as a sexual health educator. In grad school, I participated in the campus health promotion organization where we did education around drug and alcohol abuse prevention. Then we have Hiam Youssef. She worked, or they work at Moraine Valley Community College, and they're the faculty counselor, assistant professor, and AOD programming lead in Palos Hills, Illinois.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Annabelle. I really, really appreciate that. And thank you so much for introducing yourself, folks. It's so great to have you here, and hopefully we can talk a little bit more and learn just a little bit about FSL and why they can be so unique and at many times so hard and complicated to work with. Do want to acknowledge a sound you heard earlier. You did hear a bark, so I did forget to say that now that, of course, right when we were getting ready, the two dogs were sleeping. Of course, now that we're geared, we're in full presentation mode. They are no longer sleeping, or one is. The 11-year-old is sleeping. The puppy has decided not to sleep, and he is monitoring the outdoors. So he'll probably chime in. He may actually make an appearance behind me. I can't see my camera, so he may try to do that, and you may hear him. So I apologize in advance. If you want to say hello, his name is Titus. He loves attention. So thank you for just being with me as we do life with the still remaining a work from home environment. Okay. So we're going to go through we'll spend a little bit of time here and doing a little bit of an activity. And so this will hopefully you can do in the chat, or if you can come off mute. Annabelle may need to give you permission to do that. I know this because it's a little bit of a unique presentation, but want to really get interactive and learning what people current thoughts are around current statements around fraternity and sorority campus relationships, fraternity sorority campus headquarters structure, and just around prevention in general within fraternity and sorority life. And so what's going to happen is those statements are going to be shared at the very beginning. We're only going to do 3 statements today. I apologize for not updating that. And then once we put the statement on the screen, it's just going to be your time to share. And then thinking about, what does it mean? What does this statement mean? What do I think about it? Do I agree? Do I disagree in that regard? And so we're going to have a little bit of practice, but before we do that, just want to orient a bit. So we were talking about what does mean fraternity and sorority, laying that foundation. And so many of you may be familiar with the social ecological model. And so I created the similar concept, but thinking about a fraternity and sorority ecosystem. So if we think about the very center there, that's going to be our individual. That's going to be our member. So, and they're a member of a chapter which has other members in it, and then that chapter is involved in a community kind of on their campus, and even can be kind of in their overall community. So they may be interacting with chapters that are in the community. So if we're in the state of Illinois, so if we're thinking about Chicago, there may be lots of chapters in that area. For example, specifically in our NPHC community, that do a really good job collaborating across campuses. But so there's a community there, and then outside of the community, so whether that be community or campus community, we see the national organization that they're a part of. And so that includes the chapters, that includes the staff of the national organization. It also includes national organization volunteers as well. And then there's the umbrella organization that we talked a little bit about. So that's those acronyms, the NIC, the NPC, NPHC. That's the organization of the umbrella group that they're a part of as well. So that's what thinking about this. So when we talk a little bit more specifically, we'll bring this back up to help make sense of everything that we're talking about. So now we're going to practice. So before we get into a real and actual question, we'll have a practice question. And so it's not serious at all, but I still want to hear your thoughts. And so if you can put them in the chat, and if we can, if you're able to come off mute, you're able to do so as well. So this first statement that we have is pepperoni is the best pizza topping. So in the chat or coming off mute, I would love to hear your thoughts about pepperoni being the best pizza topping. Do we agree? Do we disagree? Do you have thoughts on this?
We had someone say correct and agree. It's under the question section. Let's see. Fair Roberts, if you ask my son, yes. If you ask me, no, sausage all the way. Madeline said not the
Absolutely.
best, but a strong contender.
Okay. We'll wait about 15 seconds to see if any more come in. Thank you so much for sharing these, Annabelle. I'm unable to see them, so thank you for
Oh,
sharing.
you're welcome. Let's see. Dana Alexander, mushrooms are the best pizza topping. Tia, turkey pep all day. Let's see. Chat goes. Let's just ask questions. Can't see others writing. Disagree. Yes. In all caps. Yeah, I'm not too sure about this. I'm trying to figure out if I can adjust it from my end. Because I can send chats to you guys. I don't know if it comes back the other way. But if not, we
Yeah,
can
I have
keep
to.
questions because I can see
Yeah.
them.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. This works for me if you're comfortable moderating. Sorry for the surprise role.
Not a problem.
Yeah, so absolutely. So thank you so much for sharing. And what I want to parse out some things, especially the one who said, if you ask my son, yes. If you ask me, no way. So even in the same household, we may not even agree that this is true. Some people saying of what their favorite pizza topping is. And so just some key takeaways of what it means is we know that not all pizza toppings are created equal. Not everyone is going to agree on a superior pizza topping. You're not going to go to a pizzeria and say, I want the best pizza topping, because that's going to vary wildly. Even if by server, then you may get a different type of pizza if you ask that way. And so we know that not everyone eats pepperoni. Some people eat a vegetarian or a vegan diet, and that would not be they would not be able to eat pepperonis. So if someone doesn't eat pepperonis, they're probably not their favorite pizza topping. So it's important to think about that. Some people choose not to eat pizza. In my opinion, those may not be your people if you love pizza. But some people choose not to eat pizza. So if they don't eat pizza, they probably don't care if pepperoni is the best pizza topping or not. Um, and if we continue to think, we need to be able to choose pizzerias that allow you to mix it up. I have a 5.5-year-old, and he some days chooses to eat meat, some days he chooses to not. So it's best to get a half pepperoni, a half cheese. So that way, if he chooses not to eat pepperoni, he has a half a pizza to himself. If he does, I still have a half a pizza that I can work with. So choose pizzerias that let you mix it up. And so it's important to have a little variance. And so you can see a simple statement has lots of thoughts and things to go along with it. So that's going to be kind of the premise of where we're at kind of in this conversation. They're obviously not all going to be as fun as this, but that's going to be the premise. So when you see, we're going to put a statement on the screen and then want to hear your thoughts around that. So we'll go ahead and get started. So the first one is that not all fraternity or sorority life organizations are created equal. I would love to hear your thoughts in the chat on this, or if you're able to come off mute if you want to try. Would love to hear your thoughts about not all fraternity and sorority life organizations are created equal.
Let's see. So Sarah, we got someone that said, I don't know. I was not great. I would say it just depends because there's different barriers to each group. Let's see. Sarah Roberts said some may be national chapters, some local, some more focused on service. Let's see, lots of variables. Tia said, I agreed. I assume every group is different with different resources. Claudia said no, based on differing needs. Megan says agree. After working at a large SEC school and a small private Catholic school can be very different based on just the environment.
Mm. These are fantastic. Thank you, everyone.
I'm just waiting to make sure I don't have anything else. Looks like that's
Yeah,
it.
okay, awesome. Thank you, Annabelle. Just a couple I want to parse out here. Just differing variables, differing resources, different needs, just a different based on environment. If the person's at an SEC school and a small Catholic school, a great example of how the experience is going to look and feel so much different, and what those chapters need in terms of assistance, and what they're probably going to receive in terms of assistance from their national organization. So yes, those are all absolutely great thoughts. And I love the person who said, I don't know, I'm not a member. And so that's exactly what this presentation is for, so we can understand a little bit more about what makes these groups unique. And so I believe this statement is true. And this one of the reasons I put it's the very first one is because we can learn that every organization is a little bit different, and to what terms of that means. So I think the first terms, what we want to talk about in terms of difference, is that fraternities and sororities are different. So the first things in terms of difference we want to talk about is size. Most of the times on our campuses, sororities, majority of the time, are going to be bigger. There's going to be less of them typically, but their chapter sizes are going to be bigger, excuse me. I mean, the experience is going to differ in that sororities are going to be a little bit better at rules and regulations, and some of that is because that women are better at rules and regulations than men, but other is that they have the better rules and regulations in place at the national level, and some of that is their umbrella group, the National Panhellenic Council, has better rules and regulations in place, rather than on the fraternity side it's a little loosey-goosey, and depends on the organization, because the national kind of organization or their umbrella group identifies more as a trade organization, and so they don't have specific policies that they have to follow, whereas NPC has guidelines that all member organizations of that umbrella group have to follow. And also one of the main differences between fraternities and sororities is the role of insurance. And so we already talked about size being the next one, but insurance plays a really big role, because I talked a lot about the National Panhellenic Council, so that umbrella group that's kind of over them. And so they have a lot of policies that what the organizations can and can't do. So one of those specifically is that the groups cannot have alcohol in the chapter facility. And so that means they can't have it, and members can't have it in their rooms. The chapter can't have it in terms of social functions as well. So on the sorority side, if they're hosting a social function, it has to be outside of the facility at a third-party vendor. And so whereas the fraternities, many of them can host it in their fraternity house. Some of the fraternities can host events with alcohol in their facilities, some cannot. It just depends, but no sorority currently. I think this is changing in the coming years, where we're seeing some sororities branch out a little bit and try to reclaim the social scene, because right now the social scene is dictated by the fraternities, because they're the only ones that are going to have alcohol in their facility. So we're seeing some sororities have the conversation with the governing body and with their insurance as well. But right now the role of insurance is all sorority facilities are substance free, specifically alcohol free. And so very, very important there. We also think about cultural impact. So when we think about fraternity and sorority as preventionists, it's easy to think about high-risk groups. And when it's easy to think about high-risk groups, we traditionally think about our historically white fraternities and sororities, but the experience varies. We have, and I love that someone also said that the difference in their core values and purposes. And so we think about our Divine Nine organizations. They were created because they were excluded from the organizations that existed at that time. So their purpose is to have a place for Black people. And so it's a cultural experience, and their experience is very, very different from the traditionally white fraternities and sororities that exist. And so we got to think of the way cultural impact. We also think of our multicultural groups. So whether that lead Latino, or Asian groups, or South Pacific Islanders. So those groups that exist, they exist for a cultural purpose. And I think someone said in one of the comments, they'd be more service oriented, and we definitely see a little more lean towards service in our cultural groups. They're more connected to the community in ways that our traditionally white fraternities and sororities are not. So that's definitely a not created equal point as well. And it's also important to think about the organization as a business in ways that it operates, because many of our historically white fraternities and Sororities employ people. So specifically thinking about Delta Gamma Executive Offices, that's here in Columbus, Ohio, where I previously worked. It's hard to think about that organization if you have no experience with fraternities and sororities, but that is a business that employs over 50 people. And then so it's not something we think about as a student organization on our campus. As a national organization that employs 50 people and then has a volunteer structure of over 100. And then so in many ways, it's much bigger than what we see just on our campus. So what we see on our campus is just in many ways the tip of the iceberg of the organization. It is a big scaffolding of people and interlocking webs of working together in that. But not every organization is the same. Delta Gamma, for example, is one of the larger historically white sororities. So they have some that have much smaller staffing structures. Then you look at the fraternity side, historically white fraternities, those staffs can be even smaller as well. And then we look at our Divine Nine organizations, they're going to have a little bit less staff, but they're going to be very strong in the volunteer support. And then you're going to have our culturally based groups. Some of them will have no staffing and they'll run on volunteers alone. And so staffing is going to vary very, very wildly. And with that becomes a unique capacity. So some of them have the capacity to work with campuses a little better than others. For example, Zeta Tau Alpha, they have a person who's charged with campus relations who also does their prevention. And so his job is to connect with campuses, and he wants to connect with anyone, everyone on a campus. And then so he does a really good job of connecting with health and wellness folks. He's very plugged into the Higher Ed Center. He's very plugged in with NASPA strategies and conferences. So he goes to the places where health and wellness folks could be because he wants to be able to create a relationship with health and wellness folks. That's the only position of that type that I know exists because of the capacity piece. So when we think about relationships that exist on campuses, most of the time the national organizations have relationships with the student conduct office, and then the fraternity and sorority advisor. And so unfortunately, we're not seeing relationships in terms of because of capacity with health and wellness offices. And I know I'm talking about a lot of different things and I'm talking really fast, so feel free to put in any questions if you want to stop in the moment and ask specific things that we're going over, because we may be going over very new concepts. So if there's anything you want to know, like specific, feel free to put that in the chat, and Annabelle, feel free to stop me so we can elaborate on specific things that people want to know. And next, outside of staffing, which is a little bit different, is we also see that they're volunteer-driven organizations. And so they operate on a board of directors. And then so with that board controls, in many ways, the direction of the organization. And so I have this chart that is on here. And then so the board controls the overall strategic direction of the organization. And the board can change every 2 to 4 years. And so many times they have presidents that are on the board for every 4 years. Sometimes it can be 6 to 8, but majority of the organizations, one term is 2 years. They can serve up to 2 terms in any role at any given time. So you're going to see a president serve for 4 years, and they can serve and they oversee again the overall strategic direction of the organization. Which is interesting because that would mean every 4 years the overall strategic direction of the organization can shift, which is really, really fascinating when you truly think about it from a large-scale organization that has so many different touch points across the country. So as the board sets the strategic direction, the staff and the volunteers are set out then to employ that strategic direction. So they set out making everything possible, and they work with the volunteers. The volunteers work with the staff and report mostly to those board of directors. And so it's a bit of a cyclical circle, or this one is a triangle that goes kind of back and forth, but they all work together to make things work. And again, some of these organizations don't have staff. And then so we could see but just back and forth between the board and the volunteers as well. So continuing to think about what that means. So that means relationships are very, very important between a campus and a national organization. And so that relationship could be with a volunteer. So that could be with a volunteer who's assigned to work with that specific chapter on your campus, or it could be a staff member from the national organization who's been assigned to work with that chapter. It's going to vary by organization. And it's also important to think about when we think about national organizations and them not being equal is that their priorities are not the same or set the same way. Sometimes with them being volunteer-driven organizations, their priorities can vary across the board in the way those priorities are set. Staff may not have a say at all in those priorities. They may not be able to say what they're saying or what they're hearing from the individuals. So it's important to think and know that not all priorities are the same. Not everyone is going to value the same thing. Not everyone is going to value the relationship with the campus. And that is important to know as well. When thinking about who is in charge, so if we're thinking about specific relationships and conversations we're having with the chapter on your campus, it's important to think and know who's in charge. So if you have at the local chapter, you're going to have chapter officers that are members of the organization. They're going to be undergraduate members. So they're going to kind of run the day-to-day of the organization. You're also probably going to have a chapter advisor that is going to be an alum of the organization. Oftentimes, they're also an alum of the institution, but not always. It could be someone who lives in the area who's just a member of the chapter who wants to be a volunteer, and so they are a chapter advisor. So they're going to provide advice, expertise to the chapter and guidance. Hopefully it's positive guidance. Unfortunately, it's not always the case. But then you're also going to have an alumni base that could have an alumni group or an alumni board that helps with the chapter. That chapter advisor would be a part of that alumni group or alumni board. And if the chapter has a facility that they live in, then that live-in space may also have a board that helps oversee that as well. And so you can see lots of hands in the pot. So figuring out who then makes all of those decisions. So it's important to know that there's lots of hands in the pot in that regard. And then lastly, I know we've gone on a lot on this first one, but this kind of helps lay the foundation for the other two that we'll go over. And so thinking about that university point of contact, oftentimes university, they're only, unfortunately, the only time that they're communicating with the university is when they're being reactive. We'll see a few national organizations. Sororities do a pretty good job of being proactive and staying and having that communication being constant and having those proactive conversations. On the fraternity side, unfortunately, is where we see more reactive conversations. Something happens, and so we reach out and have that conversation, or the university has to reach out and be reactive with that as well. So many times we see universities try to be proactive, and just the capacity and bandwidth of the staff members, they don't have the ability to do that. It's getting better. But many times we're seeing in this kind of the reactive conversations instead of proactive. So we're ready to move on to statement and question number 2. Any questions, thoughts, or concerns before we move on to question 2? I'll wait about 5 seconds and then we'll go forward.
I'm not seeing anything in the chat or questions, so I think you're good.
Awesome. Thank you, Annabelle. And I'll be honest, I waited 5 seconds mostly so I could take a drink of water. So being selfish in my regard. So the next statement that we have, and I would love to hear from you, is why do we think fraternity and sorority life headquarters or organizations are doing prevention? Why are FSL organizations and headquarters doing prevention?
I'll share something for the conversation. I would say to make sure that, your chapter members are safe, and it also increases retention, keeps people wanting to be a part of the organization. Chair Robert said financial liability, recruitment, and retention. Tia said advocacy / care and liability.
I love these so far. Keep them coming.
I haven't seen anything else.
All right, so we'll go in the sake of time, but if more come in, Annabelle, feel free to interrupt me and let me know what they are. And so when we start off, I'm not sure why my clicks are out of balance here, but we have to think about it. They're doing it many times for a sense of urgency. And then so some of those are insurance claims, some of those could be high profile incidents or legal challenges. And unfortunately, we have some of these high profile incidences are student deaths. I think a lot, and I don't work in fraternity sorority life day to day anymore, but I still think of the names, and I apologize for getting a little just pause because it hurts to think about when you love something so dearly and you believe in something, but it has taken someone's life. And then so, you know, we have to admit, we have to be honest that fraternity has killed the lives of young men. You know, one, it is too many. So it's not like, oh, it's only, you know, one or two this year. No, one is too many. So we have to think about that's why they're doing prevention. Because and then even the ones that doesn't end in the loss of life, we have insurance claims, there's legal challenges to incidents that are happening, and so that is where it starts. And then so it starts in that regard because they're how do we prevent that? And so I think it goes back to what Annabelle said as well. So there's a sense of keeping students safe. But it's at the ultimate line is how do we reduce insurance claims? However, reducing insurance claims isn't always a bad thing because the insurance claims and student safety can be the one and the same at the exact same time. For example, Pi Kappa Phi, which is I would say you know, one of those, you know, not created equal. I think they are one that care about prevention because they had a shepherd at the very beginning, Dr. Lori Hart, who many of you may have heard. She was a keynote speaker at our conference in 2019 and has done some many great things on campuses. But she, at the very beginning of her work with Pi Kappa Phi, so their insurance claims were through the roof, and they were trying to figure out how can we find a way to bring down insurance claims, but also keep students safe at the exact same time. And so what they did is they worked with a risk document at the time that had 10 statements that chapters should be doing. Really, they were just the basics in that. And then so, but what they did is so they created a program called the Ladder of Risk. And then so they trained people all across the country to go into these chapters and to go over the ladder of risk. And so how do we keep our events low on the ladder of risk? The higher you go up the ladder, the more risky it gets. So how do we stay kind of low in the risk level? How do we make sure we're following all of these claims, all of these rules, kind of these 10 ladders things? So how do we keep things low on the ladder of risk? And so every chapter has to receive this training before they can have any type of event with alcohol. And what they did in the first year, they saw insurance claims drop significantly. And so with that, with insurance claims dropping, they also saw you know, less incidents happen as well. And then so we have to be mindful is that insurance drives many of the decisions that they do because insurance is money. Fraternity is like, I think it's the second most expensive organization or like business to insure. And then so, and don't ask me what the first one is. It's something really, really strange. I believe it has like underwater drilling or something in regard. It's something very, very obscure. But just know that fraternities are really, really hard and expensive to insure. And so that drives many of the things that do it, and it drives the decision to do prevention in that regard. And and this is just in there because we see organizations, they'll say, oh, we do harm reduction, and really they all do prevention. They just sometimes they'll call it different things, but in many times the goal is student safety. And so they want to keep students safe, or there's that liability piece of what they're doing. I got ahead of myself in doing the context matters. That's where I was supposed to tell the PICAP story. So of why they're doing things. So they may be doing things to kill two birds with one stone, to really try to capture two different things at the same time. How do we bring insurance claims down, but how do we also then infuse safety and to make sure all of our students know what the policies are and know what prevention is and how we keep students safe.
Hey, Logan, we got another comment here.
Yes.
So Hyamet said, my guesstimation is that it affects the institution's enrollment, retention, and completion rates, as well as addressing liability claims. So just kind of tying back to what you had said.
Yes, yeah, very much. I love that all of you kind of on the liability piece, and I think definitely wanting to do liability. So we have to keep our liability down, because one of the questions we're going to see here in a minute is what would happen if we didn't, right? We would be liable for all of these things. And it also gets us into the context, are organizations doing education or prevention? I know education can be a part of prevention, but like PICAPify, the ladder of risk, I think it is the introduction to prevention, right? Because really they're just educating on what the policies are, and that sets the stage for us to then come in and do prevention. On top of that, which they did a couple years later, they started coming in and they did the alcohol skills training program. They were one of the first fraternities to do that. So they had laid the foundation with ladder of risk, and then coming on and doing more education prevention kind of in that regard. And so kind of the next piece in the flow of things is, the fraternity versus sorority context. Sororities are going to be much better at this. And some of this is that they are going to have the infrastructure to it. So we talked about volunteer structure. Sororities have a little bit better of a volunteer structure than our fraternities do. So they're going to have a better infrastructure in doing that. They're going to have a better job implementing that, because we have to think some of these organizations have over 150 chapters. And then so if we're implementing education, or a program, how are we going to be able to do that 150 times? Do we do it at the same time? Do we scale it? And so that's going to be a little bit tricky. And so we'll use ecosystem here in just a minute to look and see what might they look like. And then also that question of what would happen if they didn't? It would be mass chaos. And so that's I think the question that they grapple with is these organizations know that they need to, and that's why we asked the very first question at the beginning is, are they created equal? Because some of the organizations realize that they need to, and some still haven't had that realization yet, and they feel like it's just something they have to do, and it's not something that they need to do because this is what their members want. Our members want to stay safe, and our members want this education. So it's something that they have to do because the members want and need it. So when we think about implementation, coming back to kind of this ecosystem, and so we'll think about it backwards. When we thought about it first time, we're going to go member all the way to the umbrella organization, but we think about implementing a program. It starts, and many times can start with the umbrella organization, so they can do something, or it can start here in this national organization, and then so they can then introduce it to the community, because or oftentimes it's going to, or they can introduce it to the chapter, which then impacts the community, and then it also impacts the national organization as well. But we have to think the program will start here and then make its way into the chapter and then to the member as well. And so, but there's going to be multiple chapters that they're going into. It could be upwards of 150 chapters. And so the implementation is going to be unique. It's going to be very different from what we see on a campus, because they're going to be implementing it nationwide, many times with some have a few chapters in Canada as well. So implementation is going to be tricky. So that's why prevention is so unique in the fraternity and sorority side, because they have so many different touch points to go along with that. Any questions before we get into our third, and final statement to kind of walk through? And I realize we're running a little short on time with only 14 minutes left. All right, hearing none, we will get in to this last one, and we're going to talk a little bit about staffing and what our professional experience look like. But I want to hear what your mornings look like when you get to the office on a standard morning. What does your morning look like?
I have not gotten anything in the chat yet. See, Sarah said check there we go. Check emails, listen to phone messages, have coffee, and then handle it. Let's see. Jordan Freeman, respond to emails before beginning detective work. And then Sarah said go over emails from last night.
Awesome. I love the people saying emails. Because I would venture to guess none of these seem very chaotic. While some of these emails can be very important, relatively calm in the work that we do. So when we think about our fraternity and sorority colleagues, so the people on our campus that are advising fraternities and sororities, the work that they do can be very, very unique. And I'm not saying it's better or anything in that regard, but it just can be very, very different. And with that is there's always a morning response. And so the very first time we thought about this question, we were thinking about what does our Monday morning look like after a week of incidences, and we had somebody say, Logan and Brittany, it's every day now. So there's some type of morning response to an incident. It could be. And so one of my good friends, Megan Deshawn Runge, who previously worked at the University of Missouri in fraternity sorority life, is very brave, and she shares the morning when she learned that they lost a student. And she said it was a Tuesday. And it's a morning that she'll never forget. And then so it's not a Friday morning after a wild Thursday. It's not a Monday after a long weekend. And then so many times fraternity and sorority professionals walk in the door never knowing what they're going to run into, what those morning emails are going to say, what type of meeting they're going to be called to because of an incident that has happened, what kind of incident reports they're going to see, what those emergency emails with one or two red I can't think of the exclamation point. Wow. Logan's brain just decided to forget what those were called. Yeah, one or two red exclamation points saying, read this now. What the Google alert is going to say, that's something that our fraternity and sorority colleagues do. They have hazing Google alerts set up. It could be just nationwide or it could be just specific to the campus. So it could be fraternity and then have the name of the campus there as well to kind of learn and kind of see what's going on in terms of media. So the media being picked up, is there anything that has happened? Is there any incidents that they're not aware of that they need to be aware of? And then there's also parent communication. I know you all are not immune to this as well. I know our parents are very communicative about their students in the work that they're doing on campus. But learning, so there's any type of complaint that a student has, parents are calling and they want to talk to the fraternity sorority advisor. They want to talk to the national organization about it. And with that, and there's a sense of chaos versus calm. And not saying the work you do is not chaotic at all, but I had a friend who worked at the University of Dayton for a little bit doing fraternity and sorority. He did health and wellness there. He was the alcohol coordinator, alcohol education coordinator, but he did fraternity and sorority life before that. And he said, Logan, I just have a sense of calm. When I walked in the morning, just things were always a little bit chaotic because you never knew what was going. It always seemed like there was a fire. But there's not as many fires or a fire at all, being able to do health and wellness work. And then so knowing that your FSL colleagues, the experience is probably a little bit different. And that way, that may be why it seems like they're distancing themselves. And also knowing, especially our ones that we work on campus and even our national organization colleagues, is that prevention is a piece of the pie and oftentimes is reaction based. And so because prevention is just a part of what they do, we're seeing more and more organizations have prevention as a full-time part of what somebody does. I was fortunate when I worked at Delta Gamma, prevention was my full-time role. So I got to be proactive in what we did. Not every organization is set up that way just yet. And so what we see on our campus is prevention is just a piece of that. And then so maybe how do we work with our colleagues that work in fraternity and sorority life to be a little more proactive in the work that we're doing? We'll talk a little bit of how we bridge those conversations. So the last few things on this, I do want to just let you in an insight since we're talking about staffing of what that staff looks like. So what kind of the role of a fraternity and sorority life professional looks like. So this is data from the Association of Fraternity and Sorority Advisors. So this isn't clear indicative of what every fraternity and sorority life professional looks like, but this is the professional association for which these people would be a part of. So this gives us a little bit of insight. And then so this was a membership report from 2020. So this mostly the data is going to be pre-pandemic data. But I think that the pandemic would make these numbers worse. So what this first point is saying is that 50%, 57% of AFA members had 0 to 5 years experience. So that's going to mean they've been professionals probably for less than 5 years. I'm going to say that number has gone up post-pandemic in the last couple of years. And so the second point is, so 79% started their membership in the last 10 years. And so that is going to be, 80% of professionals working in fraternity sorority life or whereabouts would be working in the field less than 10 years. So thinking about wellness professionals, we either see a gap. What we're seeing at the higher ed center is we see a larger contingent in kind of 1 to 4, and then we see the next largest one being in kind of the 10 to 15. So we're seeing like 30% in 1 to 4, 20 to 25% in that 10 to 15 being our largest membership categories, where we see the biggest membership category is 0 to 10. This I think is really fascinating. It's important to keep in mind 44% were aged 20 to 29 and 32.4. So that is over 75% is going to be under the age of 40. So that's majority of our professionals are going to be on the younger side of things when working with fraternity and sorority. And the median membership age was 31. So that was total. So their membership age, so we're thinking probably the median age for professionals is anywhere between 30 to 33. And 64% had been in their position 2 years or less. So that doesn't mean they'd only been working total for 2 years, but they'd only been in that specific position. So they are new to their role. So that means turnover has been high in that regard. So just important things there. So that is everything on the last point. So just some takeaways from that as we start to land the plane and wrap up. So it's important to realize that there's variance between all types of groups. Every organization is different, even in the different types of groups. So if we think, oh, those groups are a little bit similar, they're going to vary greatly in the number of chapters that they have, the number of staff they have, their volunteer structure, what their board does, and how much control their board does, and how much they control the direction of things. Relationships are so important, and so that could be starting relationships with the local chapter on your campus. So working with those students, getting to know that chapter advisor. The chapter advisor is important to get to know because they are the ones that sustain year after year. So as the students change in leadership roles, the chapter advisor remains the same. Even as students graduate, the chapter advisor remains constant often. So they may rotate every 3 to 4 years, but the chapter advisor would be the one that is going to be constant, whereas chapter officers are going to rotate yearly. So relationships are so important. There is an element of chaos and insanity to it, specifically in the day-to-day life of a fraternity and sorority advisor. And some of that is they're dealing with very difficult things. And as we looked at the staffing structure, oftentimes they're very young professionals, whether that be young in their professional career or young in terms of age. And so they're dealing with very hard things, and they may not have dealt with them before. So they may be on the newer side of being a professional, and they may be trying to do the same thing over and over and over again and seeing different results. And so that may be where they need some help. And how do they, do things a little bit differently and get help in that regard. I don't want this to land the wrong way, but many times fraternities and sororities, or their professionals anyway, we feel othered and misunderstood. And so I definitely remember feeling this way, is that people didn't understand the work that we did. And so by trying to ask the right questions, you're starting in the right spot by coming to this presentation to learning more about fraternities and sororities. How do we reach out to our fraternity and sorority colleagues? And I say that because I never realized that we're not the easiest people to work with. Many times you probably have had a negative experience when working with a fraternity and sorority professional on your campus. And so this is to think about the way that they may be feeling on the work that they're doing on campus. They may be feeling a little bit othered and misunderstood. So it's important to think about, after everything we've talked about, why may that be the case? And as a result of that, that's why we self-silo. So we kind of put us, and when we make it hard to work with ourselves because we feel othered and misunderstood. Thinking about bandwidth. And the last point I just want to make, and before just kind of wrapping it all together and putting some prevention into practice a little bit, is that you don't know what you don't know. And so hopefully you've learned a little bit today about the fraternity sorority experience, a little bit more kind of widening the gap on understanding like, oh, okay, this is what it means in certain regards, or, the questions to ask of the local chapters on your campus, and kind of the things, and learning more about kind of the global landscape of that. And then, so how do we get into prevention? So how do we inform practice? Many times when we're talking about prevention, we're seeing and talking about the same things, but we're doing it in different ways. We often want the same things when it comes to prevention. We want to keep our students safe. We want to keep our students informed, but oftentimes we're doing it in different ways. We may be doing it using different language. So how do we understand the language that we're both using and make sense of it? How do we help translate with that? And then, so we need to be using prevention terminology, realizing whether we're talking about prevention, harm reduction, or we're talking about just binge drinking, that we all want the same thing. So realizing what it is are we actually talking about. So if someone uses the term high risk drinking, are they just talking about binge drinking? So what is it we're talking about? What are our expectations for prevention? What kind of priority level do we have? How do we make sure that our chapters know what resources we have available on campus? So that way, if they have priorities that they need to set for their national organization, how can we help them do that? How can they know what resources that we have available on campus? And what is it they truly want to accomplish? And so, sorry, this is how often that prevention is viewed on the fraternity sorority side of things. It can be viewed in many of these different ways. So this is how often they think about prevention. And so how can we help them kind of bridge that gap into like having a true definition and understanding of what prevention is? And with that is, how do we bring it back to the SPIF? How do we help them understand that prevention has to have a purpose? And it comes back to that as having a structure. We all know this. We probably are familiar with the SPIF. So how do we bring it back into that? As my experience working with fraternities and sororities is it lands back on this first piece of the flower with assessment. And so we're easy to think, oh, we know what the problem is, but how do we know? How do we know what the problem is? How do we truly identify the problem? And so that is a really important part. Is to make sure we know exactly what the problem is. And so how do we get back to assessment? How do we do audience? And so Annabelle put a great link into understanding the SPIF. And so this, if it's the one that I think, Annabelle, is that the one from the DEA, the Prevention with a Purpose Guide?
Campus drug prevention, but same thing.
Yep. Yeah, perfect. So that's a great one. I think it's actually on my next slide as well. So perfect. She beat me to it. And so I think focusing in on that assessment, that is where they need the most help. And then this overlap of cultural humility in the middle. And so how do we seek out understanding? That's what you're doing. How do we understand what we don't know, fill in those gaps, help us know with the SPIF, and then focus on what we do know. We know prevention. Prevention is our realm. And so how do we help people do that? And so student safety is at the key. And so how do we help people do student safety? So I know I didn't leave many time for questions. I know people may be needing to leave, but I can stick around if we want to do a couple questions. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really, really, really appreciate it. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. And so I'll stick around if anyone has questions. And so Annabelle, back to you.
Thank you so much for all of that. And yeah, I was going to say as well, let me get, I've got, let's see, I'm going to share in the chat here. So with IHEC, we do a lot of, research. We like to share, reputable sources and credible things with our affiliates. And so through the, this internet links, you can find similar things to what Logan was talking about. And I think that, like the really important thing to think about with all this is that prevention is so broad, and it's what we make of it. As you're talking about with the different organizations that we talk with, it just makes me think of, how can you in your role make an effort to maybe say advocate for those in those groups? find a way to adapt our messaging to make sure we're not leaving those groups out. Because I do kind of think about, like, even when I was in Greek life on campus, they weren't included in like the health promotion stuff a lot. It was kind of an afterthought. So I think it's just food for thought of how do we apply this spiff? How do we strategically plan to, accommodate for these groups on campuses?
Couldn't agree more, Annabelle.
Are there any more questions or comments that anybody would like to share? And then Logan, are you going to be doing any handouts or anything? I know you sent me the slides.
No, I'll get the slides in a better PDF format so people can take notes if they want, and then so I'll get those to you in just a minute.
Okay, awesome. Okay. So for the MCHES credit, so I'm going to be sending a post webinar survey that'll have a mock form where you can fill out the information for your credits, and then we will send out certificates. You are welcome. All right, so if we don't have anything else, I don't want to keep everybody going, but thank you, Logan, so much for your time today, and we look forward to your next presentation in May.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Hope you have a great rest of your day and hope you all have some sunshine wherever you may be.
Yeah.
Take care.